worked in the TV industry most of my career. I developed, not only was I in news, so I was on an assignment desk. So when stories like yours would come through on the assignment desk, I was in charge of saying this could be a news story or this could not. And then ultimately the reporters or the journalists would go out and shoot it. I wrote stories for news, hot topics, those kind of things. And then I worked in reality. So this is my whole world colliding. And the reason why you will see how much I documented my story was probably due to the DNA of the 27 years in TV. So here we go. So like I said, the doctors and the media are sharing my story. This particular talk is going to be mostly about how you can tell your story and how you can take it to the next level. So let's start. Like I said, years and years ago, this is me with Howie Mandel and my Spanish language host. I ran the division of the Hispanic division of Endemol, and that they're responsible for Deal or No Deal, Extreme Makeover Home Edition, Fear Factor. They did the Steve Harvey show. They did a bunch of shows. And I was the EP, the executive producer in charge of the programming and the division. So formats, show ideas came through me, and I would go and pitch them to the network. And then, I had this great career. I had great money. I had this great life. I would, like Scott said, I've been nominated a couple of times for Emmy, but I was unfulfilled. And of course, leave it to a reality TV producer to have a reality TV matchmaker introduce me to my soulmates. And so I met Jonathan Arnold, and I would have never met him without a Yenta or without a matchmaker. So in 2008, I married him. He relocated me from LA to Chicago, and we started to have a family. And he brought a daughter in from previous relationships. So I had a stepdaughter, and then it was not so easy to get pregnant. So after the third round of IVF, I was pregnant with Adina, and I had no complications with that pregnancy other than the fact that she was so big that I had to have a C-section at 41 weeks. And then I was back producing and writing and what have you in TV. So the second pregnancy, as you saw a little bit on the Netflix, if you haven't, I'll just briefly summarize it. I was pregnant at the 20-week mark, which is really for, when they diagnose, like if there's any skeletal issues, heart issues, they have all the fingers and toes. And it was my first pregnancy with a boy. This was after round 7 of IVF. So at the 20-week mark, I was diagnosed with something called a placenta previa. That previa means that the placenta is growing on top of the cervix. For all you people that it's too much information, especially the men, I am sorry. This is just part of the story. So the placenta is growing on top of the cervix, and that means the worst case scenario is I would probably have to have a C-section. But in that moment, and just as a caveat, my husband is a PhD economist from the University of Chicago. He's a former Air Force pilot. I sat back and I said, I've got a bad feeling about this. My blood type is O negative, which is less than 9% of this population. I feel this overwhelming feeling of doom. It was an instant knowing, that I call it. And my husband, like I said, with his background, he was like, honey, we don't have all the data. Let's just relax. You don't need to stress out. You don't need to, we don't have everything. So I'm sure it's fine. You've got great care. You're in a teaching hospital. You're on top of prenatal stuff, and we've had a baby before. So just relax. Worst thing you can tell somebody who's stressed out. So I couldn't relax. I went home, I Googled, Dr. Google here is like placenta previa. What are the complications with it? The complications could be an accreta, which is when the placenta merges with the uterus. And if that happens, you might hemorrhage. If that happens, you might need a hysterectomy. If that happens, you and the baby could die. And in that moment, like I said, intuition, premonition, whatever it was, but I call it a knowing. I knew that this was going to happen. The only difference was the baby was going to be fine. And so my producer mode went into action, which is I called everybody. I spoke to doctors. I spoke to nurses. I did not worry about where that voice came from. I did not worry about where I was, who I was talking to. if you saw me in Starbucks and you said, how's the pregnancy going? I'd be like, I'm going to die. I was grasping on to anybody and everybody who would actually listen to me. And so my husband was embarrassed. My husband was like, honey, you need to relax. The tests were all negative for what I was fearing. And so for them and the doctors, the data was giving one thing, and my gut, my intuition, this journey was telling me something else. So again, I went into action, said, okay, if I have to have a hysterectomy during my pregnancy, who do I talk to? And my OB is like, well, we transfer to maternal fetal medicine. But if that happens, you know, really the ones with the most experience with high risk reproductive organ surgeries are a gynecological oncologist. Now, I had no idea. So I made an appointment with the head of gynec, and we're in Chicago. So I made an appointment with the head of gynecological oncology at Northwestern Memorial Hospital. And of course, the nurses are like, who said you were diagnosed with this? What do you need? What kind of cancer do you have in your organs? And I'm like, I just need to talk to somebody. Begrudgingly, they set up the appointment, and I'm sitting in the waiting room with my husband, and he is looking at all of these patients who are suffering from reproductive organ cancer. They have no hair, they have IVs in their arms. And he's like, I'm embarrassed to be here. And I said, I don't know what to tell you, but everybody is telling me that they see an open road, and all I see is this Big Mac truck hitting straight for me, and nobody else can see it. Maybe this doctor, or maybe somebody else I'm talking to, will have, oh, well, I had a patient that had this amount of foreboding, and this is what it was. And maybe there's some test, or maybe there's something else. So again, producer's like, okay, let me fill in the pieces to the puzzle. Of course, the gynec says, how can we help you? And I said, you're my doctor. I'm going to need a hysterectomy when I give birth. And he's looking at the file, and he's like, Mrs. Arnold, have you been on the internet? And I'm like, well, yes, I have, but this is going to happen. And so he's like, well, why don't we do an MRI? If the MRI is negative, then I will schedule, or I mean, if the MRI is positive for this merger between the uterus and the placenta, then I'll schedule myself the day of your C-section. And I felt better. But then I did the MRI, and the MRI was negative for this, this accreta, which is what it's called. And my husband says, you should feel better. And I said, I don't, I feel worse because I'm running out of people to tell this crazy foreboding story to. So then I take to Facebook. I post, any of my friends have blood type O. Not that I knew that they would be able to donate their blood, but again, maybe somebody would have heard something. Ultimately, I spoke to my OB every week about these visions, and they were terrifying. They were incessant. For those of you who have never had a premonition, the difference between a premonition and a casual thought is, picture you're on an airplane, you're nervous about flying, and you're like, oh my God, planes crash. This plane could crash. Oh my God, this plane is going to crash. That is a fleeting, momentary thought. That is a casual thought. But if you have weeks leading up to that flight, an uncomfortable feeling that you shouldn't take this flight and that you should be there, and you shouldn't be there, not necessarily that that flight is going to crash, but that maybe when you were going to take off, you were needed in that moment. And if it is, and you are able to, then maybe you should change the flight. So this was the kind of feeling I was living with day in and day out, nonstop. It wasn't a dream. It was every single minute of the day. So at some point, my OB said, why don't you have a consultation with anesthesia? So I have a consultation with anesthesia, and she said, you're in a teaching hospital. This is where you'll recover and everything. And I said, okay, well, what happens in the event this? And she said, I hope I made you feel better. We are prepared for emergencies. And I felt I wasn't listened to. But at the end of the day, I said, it is what it is. And so I go in. My husband's on a trip to New York, and I start bleeding all over the kitchen floor. And then I go in, I go to deliver the baby. Long story short, ultimately I deliver the baby, very healthy, happy. And seconds later, I'm dead. I had an amniotic fluid embolism. It's a 1 in 40,000 risk where amniotic cells get into the mother's bloodstream. And if you happen to be allergic to it, your body goes into anaphylactic shock. In most cases, you don't make it. My doctors, all of them at the hospital, have never seen one in person. They've only read about it in textbooks. But there was one thing I didn't predict, and that was the OR was filled with extra blood in a crash cart at the time of delivery. And the anesthesiologist I had a consultation with, the very last one, said, I was very uncomfortable after our conversation. I had never had a patient speak so clearly about what was going to happen, and had had a baby before, had had a C-section before, and had sought out specialists to save her life. And with that one phone call, she flagged my file and incorporated extra blood in a crash cart in the operating room. And that is 100% why I'm alive today. Well, correction, slight correction. I spoke up. She listened. So it was both of us, and probably the unforeseen forces behind us that carried us through this. So taking that moment in recovery, every doctor in the hospital was quite familiar with my story. The medical files were filled with all the times I had tests and questions and comments, and Facebook postings. I wrote goodbye letters. I sent out goodbye letters. So at that point, the doctors wanted to know how I knew. And I said, I don't know. Why don't you tell me? And so I would document everything that they would say. I went to therapists. I spoke to people that were just like, well, why don't we worry about getting you out of the trauma? Let's not worry about all of these premonitions. And I'm like, see, the problem is it's happening in my body. And what happens, I'm already playing with the mindset of, like, one doctor said to me, self-fulfilling prophecy. And I said, do you believe that I can manifest, that I can hemorrhage, that I need a hysterectomy? So by the way, all of the visions I had came true. So the MRI was a false negative. I had that merger that happened. The MRI didn't pick it up, or it was a false negative. I had blood transfusions to the tune of 60 units of blood and blood product, and our body contains about 20 units of blood. I had the doctor I had met with 2 months before come in and perform the hysterectomy, and the baby was fine. I was put under general anesthesia. I was cut from sternum to pelvis. I was put in a medically induced coma, as you can see here. And then through the recovery, physically, I had kidney failure and heart attack and everything else. I mean, I am lucky to be alive, but I'm also grateful my husband took this photo, because nobody can believe it's the same person. So again, we were documenting this, not that he was thinking like a TV producer, but what I'm going to tell you is how you guys need to think in telling your story. So when I was recovering, all of my friends in TV were like, I want you to tell your story on my show. And my friend was the executive producer of the Steve Harvey show. And well, first I told the story locally. Okay, so I told the story locally to CBS Chicago. And when I tell you that the way that they wrote the prompt, mom predicted her death and lived to tell about it, that made all the difference in the world. And so when you think about your own story, I want you to think about a prompt, because that is what's going to attract an audience. So they did this. I did not do this, but they put this on the air on a CBS local station. And when local owned and operated stations release something on their news, they put it up on a bird, which means the satellite. So when they put it up on the satellite, all of the owned and operated stations can get it, or anybody can get it. And when it went up, AP Wire picked it up, and Yahoo the very next day put it on their cover page globally. You don't know what's going to go viral. You have no idea. If somebody tells you this is what's going to make you go viral, they are shooting in the dark, because I would have had no way of knowing that this is what was going to do what it was going to do. So when my friend asked me to come on to the Steve Harvey show, Steve asked me, did I see the light? And like I wrote in my book, 37 Seconds, I said, I don't know. They gave me a lot of drugs, and then I thought that was very, very casual to just kind of discard it. I didn't know whether I could find out, but if there was a way to find out, whether it was like one life to live and that's it, or there was something else, I was going to try and figure it out. And there was nothing typical about our story. So why did I think typical therapy was going to work? Because it wasn't helping me. So I ended up seeing a regression therapist, and that therapist took me back into the moments of flatline and then beyond. And again, I videotaped all my therapy for many reasons. One, I've never been hypnotized before, and I really wanted to remember everything. And so I wasn't sure if I could. Plus, I had neurological damage after the case. So I really wanted to ground myself and see what she was seeing. I also didn't want anyone tampering with my mind. So, I don't know. I've only seen comics with hypnotists. And so I didn't want, this wasn't a joke to me. I really wanted data. And probably because of the husband I'm married to, because when we came out the other side of it, he was very happy to suppress and repress and move on. And I was like, but wait, what if I have another vision? And he's like, no, let's just forget all that part. Let's just focus on you're healthy, the family's together. And I'm like, I can't be a mom and a wife right now until I can figure all of this out. So I videotaped all of that. And then at some point I got back through my, after 30 hours of hypnosis, she finally, what regression does is takes you back into those moments of trauma. And she tells you that your brain functions like a storage unit. So film strips that can be accessed under hypnosis. You probably do the same thing with your meditation, but I was not able to meditate at this time. And so she took me back to those moments, and you see my body convulse. You see my body actually seize. You see you hear what I'm saying, that, which nurse jumped on my chest, which nurse hit the button for the code, what my daughter was doing down the hall, that my own doctor didn't deliver the baby. And remember, I was having a C-section. So there's usually a curtain in front of the face. And I will give you that hearing is the last to go, but I most certainly couldn't have seen. And once you're intubated and resuscitated, they tape your eyes shut. So there was a lot going on during that 37 seconds. And then I was able to see what was happening before. So with all of that, I felt better. And my husband said, well, how do you know this isn't a recalled episode of Grey's Anatomy in your head? And it's a fair point now that I can look back on it much calmer. It's a fair point, but I really, not only did he push me to find harder answers that I wanted, I needed it, because again, what was I going to do the next time this happened? So I went to the therapist. I said, how do you know what I'm telling you is true? And she said, well, sometimes the only way that we get validation for a patient is the patient feels better. And you feel better. And I said, that's not good enough for me. I have witnesses. So I took the tapes back to the doctors who were present, and they said, and I videotaped the doctors so that they wouldn't forget their reactions. I Skype chatted with them. I asked them for permission to record it. If I didn't have a video camera, I had my phone where I could just audio record it. There were many, because I needed the first gut reaction. And so they saw the tapes. They said, I don't know how you know this, but it's accurate down to where we're standing, what we're doing, and everything. And so I got the information that I needed, that consciousness does exist after we pass. And not only that, it exists well into the future, and you can go back into the past. So with that being said, I'm going to turn to you. So what do you need to do? All right. So I know you can't think like a producer, but I'm telling you to think like a producer. With your story, I don't care if it's 20 years old, 10 years old, 5 years old, or what have you. Think about all of the people you've spoken to. Think about the conversations you've had. Document everything. If you are speaking, say you're speaking at Labor Day weekend with a bunch of family or friends, take some pictures, have them engrossed in conversation, because you will use every piece of photo, document, video, audio, everything. When it comes down to speaking, do not turn anything down, because the speaking is going to help you get your cadence for your storytelling, and it's going to shorten your speech when a television camera is in your face. Because when news comes or a TV crew wants to do a virtual interview with you and they want short and sweet sound bites, they need it within 30 seconds or less, or the max 1 minute. And so if you think you're going to have 12 minutes to tell your story, you're not. And 30 seconds, even though it seems like no time, 37 seconds. So even if you feel that it is not enough time to tell your story, you need to figure out what your take home points are for the audience who is watching the story. And it took me a couple of years. First, I was traumatized. Second, these are all people I knew. So imagine the surrealness, and I worked on Surreal Life, but the surrealness of, is that a word? Of being on a set, being talent, and then knowing part of the crew behind the scenes. And then all of a sudden you're like, wait, but I'm the talent right now. This is uncomfortable. So it took me a while to figure out, oh, I need to impart wisdom from the experience, because people are watching your story to get information as far as, okay, I don't want to die in order to understand that life continues. I don't want to go through what this person went through, but what parting words do they have that can inspire me, so that when I've lost a family member to COVID, I can actually feel that that person is still with me. It's not wishful thinking. And so that's why the speaking will help you. And the more you speak, even when you're not getting paid to speak on a smaller audience, that will help, because your audience will also ask you questions, and you might not have thought about those questions within your speech or those takeaway points, but it will become very clear to you. And it did for me after a couple of years, what the points were that they wanted to take away. Connect. Okay, one of the things you can do is, this is going to be your work. This is your baby, your story. So you have to do the work. If you're not technologically savvy, then find someone who is, but this is where you need help. You are going to pitch, just like you saw Mom Predicted, I think about my story and I'm like, oh, there's a Mother's Day story. How do I craft it as a Mother's Day story and make it a happy story, right? People don't want to, they will lead with doom and gloom, but they also end with very uplifting stories. And your story, you survive. So remember that that's the upswing. And so the story of what happened to you is only a smaller part of it. As horrible as that's going to sound, it's very important to you and your traumas and your healing. But the people in a minute want to get the information as quickly as possible and say, wow, did you hear that story about that person who survived this? How horrible that they went through that, but how incredible it is that they were able to stand on their own 2 feet and talk about it. So I'm telling you to go to LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, direct message people, and they will sometimes respond, not all of them. But what you're going to do is you're going to search the shows that you like. And this is something that I've learned over decades long. And because I had flipped the script, I realized, even with my story, hear this very clearly. Regional interviews have more influence than national ones. So everybody wants the big interview with Dr. Oz or the big interview with this and that. I will tell you that if you have a book or you're selling anything, regional media will move product faster, because their audience is looking to their hosts of where to go, where to guide, and it's community driven. Whereas national, if you're not watching the show and you don't catch feedback from it on YouTube, and Dr. Oz did nothing for my sales. Making Kelly Today absolutely did, but it was, she had teased it, and I was on for a very long time. So that is the outlier, but the rest of the national shows, the most my book sold was doing Good Day LA, Good Day New York, local Chicago WGN. So think about that local radio. Say yes to podcasts, even if they have a small audience, because again, you are going to get the cadence down for your points, and the host is going to ask you questions that, again, you might not have thought of. And some are going to be worth it and some are not. But I will, let me correct that. It will be worth it. It's not a waste of your time, because it's going to help you tell your story tighter. And if you haven't written a book yet, or you're writing a blog, or you're starting to get the information out there, it will help you tighten the story, because they are going to give you the information that you want for the book, because that's what the general audience is going to be asking you. Again, document everything. If you are at a pool party and you are talking, have people take some pictures. If you're at a dinner party with friends and family, take pictures. And the reason that I am telling you this is because I'm going to show you something. And this is where it all comes together. So,
do you trust your intuition? Stephanie Arnold saw her own death months before it actually happened.
Stephanie Arnold predicted that she would die during delivery.
Go in to give birth, a healthy baby boy, and seconds later, did she really die? This is the real thing. Cardiac arrest. I could actually see everything that was going on in the operating room.
Stephanie wrote about her near-death experience in the book, 37 Seconds.
I was clinically dead for 37 seconds, but I'm alive now.
This is an awakening.
Congratulations, I know you just sold your screenplay. Speak up and trust your intuition. It could mean the difference between life and death.
okay, so the reason, again, why I say to document everything is because if you're going to spend any money, it should be with an editor, a storytelling kind of editor. People ask me, what, did you get a PR agent? Did you have this for the book? I had a PR person. I spent money I didn't need to spend because I wasn't sure if promoting a book was the same as promoting TV shows. And I knew I could promote TV and market TV, but it was the same. And the PR person, I spent a ton of money, and they only booked me on 2 things. Everything that you saw on that video, 100% was from me. That was me hustling, me struggling. And that was all over a period of 6 years. So just because your story came out or was told a while ago, people in my industry were like, well, Stephanie, your story was told on a national level. I'm like, okay, that's fine. But when Netflix called, they were like, well, how did you get Netflix? And I'm like, it's just being at the right place, the right time, but also developing my story over time. And my story is different from others, and your story is different from others. And so if you think about what makes it different for yours, and how you can tell your story differently from a regional to a national level, it is going to make all the difference in the world. Again, don't say no to anything, say yes. So build on your story. What that means is take the story that you have, look at different times of the year. You've got Thanksgiving, you've got New Year's, you've got resolutions, you've got national holidays. If your NDE was dealing with the military, you've got veterans, you've got memorial. You have different ways to pitch your story, and there's back to school if your story was related to a child. So there's different ways to craft it so you can take your same story and pitch it. And that is going to take some creative energy. But the more, like, these videos that I've created, that I'll continue to create and update, every 2 or 3 years. It's not something that you're going to do every 6 months when you have something new. Every time you want to pitch your story, this video is invaluable, because most news people, you'll have 2 minutes of their time. And if you send them a long draft in an email of, this is my story, and this is the link, and not only this, here's the photo, and by the way, I have this, and by the way, I have this, they are going to trash it. They do not have time. sorry to say, like, people wouldn't even read my manuscript. So they don't read, they don't take the time to read. Once they're curious about the top line, which is why the pitch line is so important. If they're curious about the top line, they will read max a paragraph. And if you have a link there that shows a sizzle reel, like what you just saw, which is a minute long, they might get curious enough to say, yeah, okay, I can see you have a presence on TV, or I see that people have been interested in your story. I would like to learn more. So it's your baby, your responsibility. It isn't just, and so my cousin was my editor on the book, and she worked in news and what have you. So it was great to have her there, because she was like, this is superfluous to the story. This will help cultivate the story. But when HarperCollins released my book, I think they thought that, or my cousin said, well, aren't they marketing it? And I'm like, it's not their job. It's not their job. You've got 6 weeks to prove the market, and then they're done with you. They have thousands of other authors. So what are you going to do? Because if you look at everything from the point of releasing the book in 2015 to where it is today, all of those things, one speaking engagement, one contact, one podcast led to something else. And that gave me bigger, better content and a better way to speak and address the audience. And then also get comfortable with my story, because it was I'm writing the screenplay for the movie now, which is a ridiculous thing, but which we're going to go to the next page in a second. But the writing the story about going back into Flatline, I still have a little bit of a trauma, and I know why they're pushing me to write this, because this is coming from beyond the veil. This isn't them trying to save money and not hire a screenwriter. So you have to be prepared to do the work. If you're writing your book and you want to spend money anywhere, spend money on a great editor, because your family will say, yes, I'll read a couple of chapters, but they're not going to give you the feedback that you need. You need somebody who worked in publishing, who worked as an editor. And so where the next page is going to take you is that, and I think we have 5 more minutes, right? So the next page is going to take you to mentors. I was represented by William Morris Endeavor as a TV producer. My mentor was a big agent but in reality TV. And when the story happened and went viral, I called him and I said, everybody tells me I should write a book. And he's like, this is who you need to talk to. So he introduced me to the literary agent at WME. And I knew that with the agent that I would get the manuscript sold. So again, one bridge to another bridge. When the book rights were bought to do a scripted series, and that's a whole other story and for another time, we went out to pitch the scripted series. And I said, all of these meetings at the networks, and again, scripted is different than unscripted reality. So scripted, I don't know any of these people. Everybody passed on the show, but they all were fascinated with the story. So I said to the producers, why don't we do, an unscripted or do a feature? And they're like, we don't want to do that. And I said, okay, I still in my gut feel that this is a movie. So then I went to LinkedIn, I went to Facebook. I was like, who's in the movie business that's semi-retired that might take a chance and might be spiritual and could get it? Because all of my friends, as much as they love me, they're in reality TV and they are looking at, well, I don't necessarily know exactly what they're thinking, but at least from their perspectives, like Stephanie, it's, it's a scripted series, or it's this, or it's that, or do a reality show about it, but it's not a movie. So I spoke to somebody at storysummit.us, and I want you to remember that website because I spoke to David this morning. So David Kirkpatrick was the former president of Paramount Pictures. The movies he's greenlit: Forrest Gump, Thelma and Louise. He did Indiana Jones. He did the Godfather series. So classic. He has decided in his retirement, this is David right here, the 4th photo on the top. He decided he wanted to give back to aspiring writers. And so I met him online and I said, would you mind reading the book? And he said, sure. But I had the sizzle reel to send him so that he'd know that I had more content than just somebody that was coming out of the gate just to say, hey, will you do me a favor and do this? And so he agreed to read it, and he came back. He's like, Stephanie, it's a feature. And he mentored me within his organization. And then that is how I sold my screenplay to Hawk Koch, and Hawk was the former president of the Academy Awards. And so that is where I am currently. So I spoke to David when I was going to do this presentation. I said, most people really want to tell their story. And they, last time I did a plenary at IANDS in, I think, 2017, many of you had come up to me and said, how do I tell my story? How do I get my story out? So there are these mentors here. So Jeff Arch wrote Sleepless in Seattle. Deb Engel is a publisher, an editor, and an author where her bestseller, Our Little Prayer is All We Need. One Little Prayer is All You Need, where the foreword was written by the Dalai Lama. Tab Murphy wrote Gorillas in the Mist. If you're looking, and Jane Sibbett, you know her from Friends. She played, I only know her as Jane, and Randall Kreiser was the director on Grease. So you have incredible mentors. I'm pointing you in the direction of people that get stuff done. Do not waste your money on somebody else who's saying, oh, I can help you here, I can help mentor you here, if they don't have the track record. These people have the track record. I spoke to David. I said, David, can I send anybody who is interested in writing a memoir or taking their book from script to screen, can I send them through you? And he said, absolutely, of course. So take down that email, use my name, because I told him that you would, if you are going to reach out. Many of you won't, but the ones that really want this to happen, you have to be aggressive with your own baby. You grow that child through college. You don't let it go. That has helped me. All of it has helped me develop my new website. You can check it out. 37 Seconds became an audiobook in January. And I just want you to think, before I end this, have you done everything you can do to take your story to the next level?